This is very personal work for me.
Politics,
I believe I was called to
sex,
tell my story, use my voice, be a
gay
voice
people,
for the community, to speak
black
to
people,
and for a community of people
the underdog,
that's been ignored, denied,
love,
overlooked.
relationships, religion,
This is my life's work.
religion,
I want to use words to uplift,
every single
inspire, encourage.
do something different. Every Monday at 10. Good day, thinkers, thought leaders, progressives, and dreamers. I am Craig, the writer Stewart, and this is So Much to Say. Today we have a special guest. I always say special guest because they really are special guests. But this is actually one of my close friends, and we're going to be discussing a topic that really isn't discussed very much. It's domestic violence, but domestic violence in gay relationships, LGBTQ relationships. And I thought it was important to have this conversation because it happens more often than we acknowledge. In fact, it happens about 50% of all gay relationships, or LGBTQ relationships, I should say. And so I have my friend Jamel here to discuss a relationship that he had. And in fact, it happened like right when he and I first became friends. We met in 2012. And so I met Jamel because he had read my first book. Someone had suggested my first book to him, which is Words Never Spoken. And he reached out to me on Facebook. And just to share just a piece of what he said to me in that Facebook message, just to kind of give you an idea of how this friendship began. It's dated October 19th, 5:07 p.m. And he says, "Hey, Craig, I purchased your book through one of my coworkers. This was hands down the best $20 I've spent all year. I feel like I was reading parts of my own story. All I can say is thanks for being brutally transparent. It helped me. These words are healing me. Thanks." And so, of course, at the time, I had no idea how the words or how the book was impacting him or anybody else for that matter. But that's the beauty of storytelling, and that's what I find most fulfilling about being a writer and sharing my stories, is that you really have no idea where those stories are going to go, how they're going to touch people, how they're going to impact people, how they will grow people. Because once you release it, you have no control over where it goes, where the story goes. So after some time, we developed a friendship, and he ended up supporting my greeting card business. We got to the point that we started hanging out. On one night in particular, this was the very first time that we had actually hung out, and we had gone out for drinks. When we left there, I remember getting home, and I was just about to get ready for bed, and the phone rang, and you were calling to say that you were in the ambulance and then you were on your way to Grady Hospital. And I said to you, well, hey, did you need me to meet you down there? And you said, yeah, that would be great. And when I got down to the hospital, you were in the emergency room, and
I had to get 6 staples in my head because I gotten hit with an iron. And that was the moment that I knew that no matter how much I loved him, no matter how much I cared about him, no matter how much I probably would even want to change my mind after, that I had to move forward.
So one of the first things that I asked you when that happened that night, well, it wasn't even something that I asked you. One of the things that I said was, this isn't the first time that it became violent, because you don't go from 0 to 10, and just hit somebody upside the head with an iron. So I figured that this was a progression. When was the first time you remember it became physical? Like, what was the first time? How long had you been together, and then how long into the relationship had it happened?
We had, if I can recall the first time, because we got together in November of 2010, and the first incident happened in January.
2011.
Correct. So about 3 months in.
Okay. And what was that first physical altercation? Was it a punch? Was it a slap? Was it a kick?
It was a combination of all in the car driving.
And what provoked it? Like what?
Because we had broke up and I said I didn't want to get back together.
And this was after like 2 months or 3 months
Correct.
together?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was his reaction.
Correct.
And so what were you thinking when it became physical? Did you fight back that first time?
Yeah, we were in the car. I mean, more than fight back, I was shocked. Like I completely did not expect that.
And you were driving?
No. He was driving.
He was driving.
I completely did not expect that. I just did not. It was, when you are in that much shock, because it's different than, getting in a fight with just somebody else. When you are in a fight with somebody who you're in a relationship, the biggest thing that's going through your head that's not going through your head in any other situation is, I can't believe this is happening.
Right.
So a part of you is paralyzed. Like, I can't believe this is happening, especially the first time it happens. So my first reaction was less of fight back and more of get out.
Right. Yeah. And so what happened after that? So where were you en route to? Were you on your way home?
Leaving Joe's.
You were, okay, leaving a
Or
restaurant.
Einstein, one of them two.
Okay. And so what normalized it after it? So like
Nothing normalized it. I left.
So you
You
left.
got away.
I was at a restaurant, and I think he had called me. I was at a restaurant with some friends or whatever, and he had called me and said, "Can we talk?" And of course, I was like, "Sure." And so he drove by. I hopped in the car, and we're talking. And he was like, "So is it over?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's over." And that's when violence erupted. I got out of the car, called my friends, they picked me up, and that was it.
So why had you ended the relationship? Was it over because there were signs that it could become physical, or it had nothing to do with
It had
it?
nothing to do with that.
Had it become, was it verbal before that? Had he been
No.
so there were no warnings or
No.
any indication that made you think that he could potentially.
No.
So once you guys got into the fight in the car, how many days, how much time passed after he called or you called? And
It was probably about, I might have been like 2 weeks.
because this was 3 months into 2 or 3 months into
Yeah.
the relationship, but how long did you end up being together?
We ended up being together about 3.5 years.
Okay. So 3 months in, you got the first warning, but then probably 2 weeks passed and you guys started communicating again. And so what changed your mind from, okay, it's not over? Because something had provoked you to say to him that day in the car, this is over.
I just wanted to stick with my decision.
Okay.
But, after that, you get to missing somebody and all of that. Your emotions take over. And a lot of times, your emotions completely override logic or anything like that. So, I mean, it happened. And that was the first of a few.
So then when you guys got back together, how long from that point did the second, do you think? Do you remember?
It may have been like 6 months after that.
And what was it? Was it a punch? Was it a kick? Was it a...
It was an attempt at a punch. I can't remember, Craig.
Because I'm trying to understand, like, how did it go from this little fight in the car, and I shouldn't say little because I don't want to minimize it, from the fight in the car to an iron upside.
So let's without asking all those questions and trying to do the timeline, and it's really not the details. It's more about the cycle.
Right.
So it happened probably about 2 or 3 times, and then we had a full breakup for about 6 months. We got back together, and it was fine for about, I'm gonna say almost a year or so, and then it erupted again into. I mean, there had been little tiffs back and forth, verbal abuse and, a lot. It wasn't just physical. It was emotional. It was verbal. It was all of that.
And when you say emotional, what does that look like? What does that mean?
Someone, especially men, we're big on ego. So when another man attacks your ego, when he emotionally, when you are with somebody, you know exactly what to say. Just how you can emotionally massage somebody, you can say what they want to say to get what you want out of them. You can do the opposite. You can be emotionally manipulative, which is abuse. So that can happen as well. I mean, and a part of me stayed as long as I stayed because, after you get over that moment, you kind of rationalize and say, well, this person does love you. And I don't want to minimize that they do, because people do. They love you how they know how to.
But to be clear, you were clear, or you became clear that that wasn't how you wanted to be loved.
That I became clear that love and relationships are two different things. And a lot of times we stay because we love. We stay in dysfunctional relationships because we love somebody. But I can love you and not be with you.
But I also think that sometimes we stay in dysfunctional relationships because we're so used to dysfunction. Some people are so used to dysfunction. You've learned to crave dysfunction, and not everybody. But I'm just saying, I think because the kinds of relationships, the kind of relationships that you find yourself in, typically are relationships that you've seen modeled for you.
Either that, or just think about it, Greg, and especially from your generation and mine. What does a same gender loving relationship look like? We don't know. So there was no model. There is no model. And which is why you find a lot, here in Atlanta, you got so many same gender loving men, and most of us are single because we don't know how to be. We stay in situations. It's not because we don't know how to get out. We just don't know that either it's as serious as it is, or we just don't know how to be in it. We don't know what success in a same gender loving relationship looks like. And neither have we defined it most of the times. We just know I like you, you like me, we have some kind of connection or some kind of chemistry. So we're together. And then there's a whole other part that nobody else sees. The behind the closed doors part, but everybody else, there's this world of pressure from friends and other associates. Y'all look so good together. Y'all work so well together. Oh, y'all are so good for each other.
But I think part of what happens, and part of the reason that I wanted to do this show was because in my second book, I talk about how we discount or we minimize a punch, a slap, a kick because we're both men.
I did it.
And we feel like because we're men, oh, that was just nothing. We just kind of had a little tussle.
Right.
And that wasn't really that severe. But it happens so frequently, and nobody really talks about it.
Nobody talks about it because it has become normalized from societal perspective, rather. I'm sorry. Societal perspective. It's normal heteronormative standards.
Right.
We are taught never to hit who?
Women.
Never hit women. We are taught to never. It don't matter if it's your mama, cousins. Never hit a girl. Men are taught that you never hit a girl. We're not taught that with men. So if a guy hits you, you hit him back.
Well, we're not even taught how to be in a relationship with another guy, too, which goes back to your point about we don't have models and examples of what our relationship should look like.
So when it comes to another guy, it's not called, and I never called it domestic violence until I was actually talking to somebody who was like, well, we have domestic violence advocate. And I'm like, I wasn't in it. Wait a minute. I was.
Right. But I think the important question, too, is because I'm sure there's somebody listening probably thinking, I would never let a motherfucker put his hand on me. And,
we all say that.
Right. We all say that. And I've never experienced that. But I think that, and there's something to be said about the saying, we're all one decision away from making the same bad decision that someone else made. But where were you in your life mentally? Perhaps your inhibitions were down. Perhaps you weren't in the space of paying close enough attention to what was happening in that relationship or around you. Why do you think you allowed it to happen?
That is where I wanted to focus on. Me. Because, what is this, 4 years later? I have a completely different perspective on it. And because at the very beginning, it was so much pointing fingers at him.
Because for every one thing that you can learn about someone else, there are three things that you can learn about yourself.
Absolutely. And that is the part that, to me, has been the best part about the entire experience, is what I've learned about myself.
So what are some of the things you would say you learned about yourself in that time?
At that time, after or during?
After. Like, looking back, like, what were the lessons?
I learned how to love me.
What does that mean, though? Like, people say that all the time, like, oh, I know how to love me.
Well, part of loving you is when you set parameters and standards around your heart. Like I didn't shut anybody out, but I had to take time to say, first of all, it's okay to be single. And I mean, I entertained, somebody for about 6 months after that, but I realized that I had to take the time to, as Ayanla says, do the work.
Right.
So for me, it's just not 1, 2, 3.
Right.
It's, learning how to love yourself. I can't say what that is for anybody else.
Right.
I can only say that about me. And I learned that, and I got this tattoo on me that says less is more. And while that is a wonderful phrase, for me personally, it means I am enough. And I would look at this tattoo just about every day and said, I am enough. These are my standards. And if you cannot love me, at least at the level that I love myself, then we're not going to be together. It's not going to work.
What space were you in then that allowed that energy to come in? How is it that you allowed the abuse to happen?
Because of a lack of self-awareness. We had went on vacation about 10 days before the incident happened. Because remember, we were catching up when you and I
went out for that first time.
Right. And I'll never forget, I was on the plane. During the vacation, I wanted to come back home. I remember that I was on the plane on the way back, and I was reading Eat, Pray, Love. And I was at the portion of the book where she talked about her husband at the time would not give her a divorce. And she was in the car with her friend, and her friend was like, just put it out there what you want. And so I did that. I was on the plane, and I said, God, get me out of this. And 10 days later, I was out of it. Didn't expect it like that. But at that point, I was already at a state of awareness. So truth be told, I was on my way out anyway. There was already a plan in my mind that was devised to get out of it, because I just was not happy anymore.
I believe that when we don't move fast enough,
There we go.
or after God or the universe has given us clues or signs,
They will eject us out.
it will eject you out. And that doesn't just mean like a relationship. That could be a job. Like,
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many jobs I've had, and I knew in my gut that I didn't want to be there and that my time up at that job was done. But I stayed there because I was comfortable, because it was a paycheck.
Yeah.
And without notice, the job ended. And I just feel like God will pull the rug up underneath you, from up underneath you,
Right.
if you don't move in the allotted time that he's allowed. So, as a result of that relationship, did you ever seek any type of counseling?
Absolutely.
Or
Yeah, I went to counseling immediately afterwards.
okay,
And my therapist was like, don't you dare go back.
because you had thought about going back at one
Absolutely.
point, and why was that?
Because you love him.
So then the question becomes, on the plane from the vacation and you were reading Eat, Pray, Love, why were you praying to be out if you longed to go back, if you craved going back?
Just because you crave to go back don't mean you do it.
Right, but what do you think that was? Do you think, because the thing is, I know what it's like to be in a relationship and come out of a relationship and to miss the person and to feel like maybe you're second guessing it. Maybe you acted too hastily, and maybe there was something else you could have done differently to kind of make it work. But in this case, it sounds like 3 months in, you knew that you wanted to be out, and then here towards the end of the relationship, which you said was 3 years, you wanted to be out. So I'm just trying to understand, what was it that was missing? Do you think that missing piece was in you?
Mm-mm. You. It's not only that you love them, you want to believe that they can change. And I believe that he has changed. I just also believe that we were not meant to be in a relationship.
Interesting.
But see, the thing is, this time is different. Where I am now is different from where I was. I believed that he could change then. I believe that he could change after. It's just that it stayed after because I didn't want to see if it was true or not. I wasn't gonna go back this time to prove or to see or be inquisitive about.
So when you were going through this, like throughout the course of the relationship, did your friends or family, anybody know that this was happening?
Yeah.
And what were they saying? Were they different towards him, or were they still very inviting and welcoming to him?
Some of them were, some of them wasn't. Some weren't, rather. You get people who will support you through any transition, and if you're okay with it, they're okay with it.
I've had
Surface.
I've had two relationships that I kind of thought about today. And I write about it in the first book. I talk about a relationship that I had. If you read the first book, it's with Carrington. Yeah. And I talk about how I had moved in with him. He had asked me 6 months in to move in. Mm-hmm. But I had made it my business to not move in until we had been dating at least a year. Mm-hmm. And so once we got to the 1 year mark, he asked, again for me to move in. And at the time, I was in a very precarious financial space. Mm-hmm. I had just produced the play again at that time. And in that particular instance, it didn't really do well. It flopped. And I didn't really have a backup plan. So I was in transition. I was looking for work. And so the bills were piling up. And what I realize now, looking back, that part of the reason that I moved in, and I think sometimes we do this, we move too quickly, it's because of circumstance. Yeah. Not because the relationship was ready to graduate to the next point.
I agree.
And so I ended up moving in. I did love him. He loved me. Mm-hmm. It was great. But I just think that we moved in hastily. And so I moved into his place, to his condo. I'll never forget feeling like a visitor. There were things that he did, of course, to try to make me feel comfortable. We went out and chose the furniture together. We painted the place together. We chose the colors together. But I always felt like I was in his house. Mm-hmm. And part of it was because at the time he had a home phone, and I remember interviewing for different jobs, and I remember phone calls coming in, but he didn't want me to have access to the voicemail code. Mm. And I remember, this is many years ago, I was 26, so that would never happen now. But I was 26 at the time. And again, and this is where I'm going with it, because at the time I was in such a fragile state, because financially I was broken, spiritually I was broken, mentally I was broken, because of everything that had happened with my career or wasn't happening in my career. So I was in this very vulnerable state. So I say all of that to say, that would have been a moment or space in time where I could have been someone that could have fallen victim to a domestic situation. And I'll never forget one night I was hanging out with my friends, and he and I had gotten into it earlier that day about something. I don't recall what it was. But I remember texting him to say, hey, I'm on my way home, just as a courtesy, because we lived together. He texts back and said, well, you need to find someplace else to stay tonight. This is where I'm going to stay because you asked me to come move in, and now this is my home. Mm-hmm. And so I went home anyway. I went to the condo anyway. And I remember getting there, and the closet had collapsed because, they put those little cheap little hangers in there, and so it had collapsed because it was just too many clothes in there. And so he was in there trying to get that straightened up because he was going to have closets done. I'll never forget, he said to me, well, what you come here for? I thought I told you not to come home. I didn't feel like being bothered tonight. I said, listen, this is where I live, and I'm not going to look for some place else to stay. We ended up, subsequently, we got into a fight. We got into a physical fight because he said to me, well, then you can just go sleep in the living room. Now, again, this is a condo, so it wasn't like a full couch in there. Even if it was a full couch, I probably still wouldn't have stayed in it. It was like a little chase. It was like a chase. And so I said, I'm not sleeping in there. If you want to sleep separately tonight, then you go sleep in there. Mm-hmm. He ended up getting into the bed before I did, and he sprawled across the bed. So, of course, I didn't have any place to get in. So by the time I had brushed my teeth, and at the time I was wearing contacts, I took my contacts out, he was sprawled across the bed. And so I said to him, hey, can you slide over? I said, can you slide over? I'm ready to go to bed. And he kind of like situated himself in the bed, wasn't moving, and said, I told you could sleep in the living room. I said, I'm not sleeping in the living room. You need to move over. I proceeded to move him. The rest of it you can read in the book. But basically, read the book. Well, I'm just saying it to the people that are listening. We got into it. I put my hands on him, and we got into this fight. And the dysfunction of it was he ended up leaving for probably about 30 minutes, and then he came back and forth. I was in the bed. So he ended up leaving to cool down. But the very next day, we proceeded to go to the Container Store to get the custom closets done, to get them measured, and we never talked about it. And it was so dysfunctional to me. It felt wrong on every level, and I knew that was the beginning of the end for me. I knew that it wouldn't be long before the relationship ended, not because it would become physical again, and I definitely take responsibility for my part in it. But I just knew that it didn't feel right. The only other instance that I can point to in terms of a relationship that I experienced was I was cheated on, and I was out of town, and I found out that he had cheated. So when I came back in town, it was my place. He had moved into my place, and I got in late. And when I walked in, he was, in the bed sleeping, and I woke him up, and he went to proceed to explain why it had happened, or I don't even know what he was going to say. But before I even thought about it, I just smacked across his face. I felt so horrible because I'm not an aggressive person. And again, that was a sign for me that it was time to get out, because I pride myself on not allowing someone to make me something or someone that I'm not. And if it brought out that kind of aggression in me, it was definitely time for it to be over. Because there's never an excuse or never a reason to put your hands on someone or to allow someone to put their hands on you. But I say all of that to say, I think that sometimes we're in a space of vulnerability because, again, for you to end up in a relationship where that happened, there has to be something said about where you were emotionally or maybe financially or maybe something was going on in your life. I don't know what it was.
I can tell you. We had gotten into a relationship 4 months after I had come to Atlanta. And I left where I left my hometown, everything that I had known. And when I tell you I was so green, like everything about me was green and naive and didn't know. And I'm not saying that meeting him was a bad time. That's not true. But there was a lot more development about me that I had to do. Personal development that had to occur. That should have occurred. That could have occurred, not should have, because everything happens for a reason. But I can say that we definitely did move quickly. It was right after the first breakup. A month later, after the first, incident, about a month later, we were moving in together.
And see, and part of the thing too that I've discussed in Words Never Spoken is we often act on the feelings, the sexuality feelings of being gay before we deal with the psychology behind the feelings. Absolutely. So before we give ourselves permission to be gay, we're acting on the feelings. We're having sexual contact. We're dating. We're doing whatever. We're interacting, but we haven't really sat down and processed what it means, what it feels like, what it looks like to be gay.
And I hadn't even come out to my family. Exactly what I mean.
And I've said on so many occasions that, especially in a city like Atlanta or D.C. or New York where we're in great numbers, just because you participate or move about in the gay community, just because you matriculate, you have gay friends, you participate in gay social events, you go to gay pride, doesn't mean you've given yourself permission to be who you are. It doesn't mean that you've reconciled the feelings or your spiritual beliefs or religious beliefs. I think a lot of times there are so many of us that are moving about in this community that are broken, that really haven't gone about doing that personal development, haven't gone about doing that work, that self-healing. Right. Because I really believe that there's an emotional trauma that happens during the coming out process. And even before the coming out process, I think it happens somewhere in the proverbial closet. At some point, most of us, I can't speak for everyone, but most of us, most of the men that I've spoken to that identify as gay or bisexual, at some point tried to wish or will the feelings away or pray them away. And I think at some point, you admit to yourself, okay, this is who I am gay. Even if you're not comfortable saying it, but it's somewhere inside of you, in the fibers of your being, you know that this is who you are. And I think there's a breakdown, there's an emotional trauma that happens. And I think that for the rest of your life, you have to spend rebuilding that, retooling that, reaffirming yourself. Because even now, as an openly gay person, there are certain things that still kind of give me pause. There aren't the things that made me pause and stop when I was 23, but there's still things that kind of make me uneasy. But I know that that's an area where I still have work to do.
I completely agree with that. And you said something a little earlier, like we're broken and
we're broken. We're broken, but we're a community of broken hearts and souls trying to have relationships with other broken hearts and souls.
The thing is, at the beginning, I blamed him for breaking me when it wasn't the truth. He didn't break me. I was broken, and I hadn't done what I want to say. I hadn't done the work. I didn't realize that there was work to be done until afterward, or till right before and then afterwards.
And I think what happens is many of us come into relationships, period, whether you're gay, straight, whatever. I think most people come into relationships looking to be put back together or put together.
Correct.
Completed.
In the search for wholeness.
Right. But I think in some instances, in terms of this domestic violence, I think in some cases, it's rooted in internalized homophobia. It's their own hate for themselves, and they in turn inflict it on you and try to punish you for their own insecurities or issues that they have with their sexuality, and they sometimes take it out on you. I see it all of the time in this community in terms of, it doesn't always manifest or as something physical. I see it in the way that sometimes we handle each other as gay people. The way that we speak to each other, the way that we spit fire at each other.
We have become masters and connoisseurs at reading, so much so
Right.
that heterosexual women pattern their language and their behavior after us.
This domestic violence thing, it happens so often. Like I'm literally thinking about the many cases and instances that I've heard in my lifetime.
Well, I just told you about one earlier today when we were on the phone. And let me tell you, after I sat there and thought about it, we had a conversation a few days ago, and a few days ago, I'm done, I'm through, I don't have to take this, blah, 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 all of which are true. Today, we're back together. And while everything in me is like, really? There's a part of me, a great part of me, that is extremely empathetic because I was there. And I was that person. And I want to say, you really don't understand what's going on. And you really don't understand that it's going to happen again. This is going to come up again, because what happens is, and this is whether gay or straight, because I have a family member who is in the smack dab middle of the same kind of situation. Both parties, especially the person who does the aggressor. There you go. The aggressor always wants to get better, always says that they want to do better. They genuinely feel remorse, but they also know how and what to say to get that person back on their side. The aggressor always says, you know what, I need to get help. There's something wrong. I should have never done that to you. You don't deserve that kind of treatment. I just want this to be good. And they always say, well, I'm going to go to counseling. And they might do it a couple times, but the work is never continued.
But I also think, too, like when it comes to relationships, I think what happens is we approach relationships with this feeling or thought that every relationship is going to come with something. Not necessarily abuse, but some people come into relationships thinking, oh, well, somebody's going to cheat, or everybody kind of feels like there's going to be something.
I almost would have subscribed to that a couple years ago, but today I don't.
I don't either.
I don't subscribe to that.
But that's what I'm saying. I think a lot of times people stay in it because they're like, well, I'm going to have to deal with something.
They tolerate and they compromise.
Right. They confuse compromise with settling. And I did that for a long time. It wasn't in an abusive situation, but I lowered the bar so many times in relationships.
I definitely lowered the bar. And that is one of the things you asked earlier, after what have you learned about yourself? I learned to be rigid in my standards and non-compromising. There are, what do we call them? The deal breakers. You set your deal breakers, and you don't compromise your deal breakers because they're deal breakers, but
you don't negotiate them.
Not at all.
Yeah.
They're non-negotiables. That's the word I was looking for, or term I was looking for. They're non-negotiables. And so there are certain things, and for every person, that's different.
Right.
But for me, after I got out of that, my non-negotiables are still my non-negotiables today. And this is what I wanted to say. I was victim to it. Most of us go into relationships and we be in the cloud. And then when reality hits, we come crashing down to the ground. And when you come crashing down to the ground with that much force, bruising and injury is inevitable. And what happens is with most couples, they still try to stick together limping and bruised and tattered, and nobody ever really gets healed. And the relationships eventually end with both persons being even more damaged than they were. It's a very good approach, and I can talk about it because I live it to this day, to come into a relationship grounded.
Well, I mean, I think that there is definitely work that has to be done in whatever relationship you find yourself in.
But there's work that has to be done before you ever get in the relationship.
You need to do,
because
your work before you come into
right the work that there work we have put that in a very negative connotation, like, ooh, relationships are hard work. But there's hard work that is laborious, and there's hard work that is rewarding.
But the work isn't with the fundamentals. Like, fundamentally, you should be even.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
You know what I mean?
What I'm talking about is the work that we do to make relationships work. The work that you should do to make relationships work is the work that is rewarding, that brings a smile to your face, not the work on the fundamentals. Because if you're working on the fundamentals, then you just let that go, baby.
Right.
Just if you have to say, you shouldn't hit me. That's stuff you teach the 4-year-old going to kindergarten.
Right.
Not the 34-year-old or the 24-year-old either.
But, I've read somewhere on social media, and you probably have seen it before, it said we date at the level of our self-esteem.
Oh, I ain't never heard that or seen that.
We date
but that's
at the
good.
level of our self-esteem.
I agree with it.
And, for the past 5 years, I've been single because I have really become very clear about who I am.
Right. And that's very important. I talked about self-awareness earlier. You are clear, but Craig, you are open. Mm-hmm. If it happens, wonderful. Mm-hmm. But if it doesn't, I'm okay.
Mm-hmm. Because I'm clear now that the penalty of being a person of quality and substance, correct, sometimes the penalty or the consequence of being a person of substance and value means being single for some time, just a little bit longer, for you to sift through the foolishness, the minutia, and get to the best.
Sometimes the penalty is the reward.
Absolutely, because there's a certain amount of growth. But I think people, when they're single, spend so much time pining over, why am I single? Oh, I've been single for this amount of time. Or when is it going to happen for me? Or thinking it is going to come packaged a certain way. It's going to look a certain way, certain complexion, certain height, certain body style. He's going to work at a certain place. They fantasize this idea of being in a relationship. And then when we get to the person, we spend so much time trying to teach them how to be in relationship with us, when the reality is that it should just be organic and seamless.
And let me tell you why that's important to work on you. And this goes back to the whole domestic violence issue. And this can apply to any relationship. The person that builds you up is the person that can break you down. So what happens is we come into situations, men, women, gay, straight, whatever. And that person builds you up. And when they build you up, you have given them the power to break you down. So when they do it, you stay. When that person that builds you up is you, then only you
that's what I was gonna say.
Can break you down.
That's why.
So that's why I'm saying exactly. That's why it's important for you to come whole, and that's why it's important for you to do the work. Because once you've built yourself up, and I'm not saying arrogance, I'm not saying ego, I'm talking about confidence. Because see, the thing is that when somebody comes to you and they're trying to build you up, you're like, baby, you trying to put vinyl siding, and this is brick.
But here's the thing: one of the problems that I used to have too was try to heal people. I tried to save people, and
save your complex.
Yes, the hero syndrome. And again, and I don't mean to keep plugging the book, but Words Never Spoken, there's a chapter called Patterns, and I literally write out the patterns that I started to notice, because I was very clear by, let me see, I guess I was about 27, about 30, by the time I was like 30 or so. I was really clear about the dysfunction that I was attracting and how I was complicit in that dysfunction. And so I was able to write down the names of like the previous people that I had gotten into relationships with or gotten really close with. And there were certain similarities. And the one similarity, the common denominator, was me. And that was, I was trying to save them from something. Like I was involved with one guy who, he had abandonment issues. His parents or his mother was a crack addict, and he spent a lot of time in foster care. So he was waiting for me to disappoint him and to let him down. And I spent so much of that relationship trying to teach him and train him and show him who I am. I was in another relationship with someone that I tried to save and save him from religion, and all of the, yeah. And what it taught me, that one in particular, taught me a very expensive lesson. Because when I was clear what I was doing and that I wasn't actually trying to be in a relationship with him, I was trying to heal his emotional wounds by being and offering him something different, something that he hadn't seen before, because he had this idea that all black gay men played games and no one was really serious or consistent about building. And so I was trying to be the opposite of the antithesis of what he thought or expected. And it was a very expensive lesson for me because it resulted in him stealing all of my winter clothes in the middle of January. A very expensive lesson. And so writing that first book, it helped me realize you cannot save anyone. Whoever comes to, only Jesus saves. Whoever comes into your life, they have to come with a clear understanding of who they are, what they want, and what they offer. Because I'm clear about those things. That's right. And I no longer panic and allow fear to have its way with me and to convince me to make hasty decisions and to jump into things. And you know what I mean? So I'm just very clear. Yes, I'm ready for partnership, but I'm really clear about what that looks like for me now.
Self-awareness, Craig. It is self-aware. But when you are not self-aware, then you just allow anything in. And what happens is, you ask the question, why did I stay and why did I deal with it and what led up to it? When you are not self-aware, you tolerate it and you feel like you're obligated to make it work. And you feel like you're obligated to, work. Actually, you feel like you have an entitlement to do it, but you only can see the flaws in somebody else. Right. You can't see yourself.
And how you contribute. Not contribute to being beat up or battered. No. But how you contribute to playing in that role and allowing it to happen to you.
Let me tell you something about my ex that I am very clear about. Because we are all God's children. He is not a bad person. Truth be told, I don't think he ever was a bad person. What happened because he may have been the aggressor, but I allowed it.
You participated.
Nobody can do anything. I did.
Right.
Nobody can do anything to you that you don't allow. The first time, unexpected, it happened. Okay, cool. But when I go back, I gave permission.
Right. Yeah.
Every time I go back, every time I went back, I acknowledged and gave permission
for it to continue.
So I wasn't saying, in the breakup, it changed about a year after it changed. It flipped. Enlightenment happened for me. And really awareness started to begin to take a seat in my soul. And part of self-awareness was I became very convicted spiritually about this. Stop calling him bad, because if you call him bad, that means you calling you bad because you're the one who allowed it. Because you're the one who loved him.
Again, for every one thing that you can learn about someone else, there are three things you can learn about yourself. Right.
Stop calling him bad. Stop saying that. Stop trying to demonize him. Stop trying to paint this bad picture, because you dealt with it. You contributed to the situation. And I'm not, like you said, I didn't say that, oh well, I can tell you why, he hit me. That's never acceptable. I don't care how angry you get with somebody. I don't care what they taught you, what you learned. Violence is not acceptable, especially for somebody who you say you love, right, or two people who say they're in love. But I became self-aware, and part of that self-awareness was forgiveness. And part of that forgiveness was not only forgiving him, but forgiving me. So now I have a clear conscience. Now my self-awareness allows me to be able to have a conversation with him like nothing ever happened, because I got the lesson out of it. What's the lesson in it? I grew and I learned not about him, because it wasn't my job to learn about him. It was my job to learn about me.
Nor is it your job to try to teach a person how they're flawed or how they, whatever it is that you think they're supposed to learn from the situation. Right.
He had his own work that he had to do.
Absolutely.
And prayerfully, he did it. I believe he has. But once again, I'm not consumed with wondering if he has or not. All I do is hope for the best, But like I said, I want to be very clear that in my mind, 4 years later, he is not a demonized figure to me. That's an unfair assessment to give that person, because the truth be told, in our families, we all have an uncle, a cousin, some of our daddies, brothers who are amazing people who have been the aggressor.
So, in terms of how you finally left that relationship, it began with that night in the ER after he had struck you with the iron. What was that process like? Because you lived together at that point. So you had filed a restraining order, and so he couldn't come to get his stuff. One of his relatives had to come and get the stuff from the place, and then you ultimately or subsequently moved.
About a year later.
Okay, so you stayed there for a while, and then because he was arrested, because you didn't. Did you press charges or did the state?
Legally, there is no you press charges. Once it gets to a certain point where the state says, "I don't care what you think. This is what's going to happen."
Right.
So I had no say so.
So he was arrested, and then of course he was released later, however long later.
Yeah, and whatever legal ramifications happened thereafter,
Right.
I didn't really follow up with that because once again, at that point, it wasn't my job.
So that was the beginning of the final breakup.
Yes, that was the beginning of a final breakup, and it was a hard. That first year or so was the hardest afterwards because I didn't even sit up on this podcast and act like we did not physically reconnect in that process.
So you saying y'all
slept together?
Oh.
Yeah, I said it, not you. You didn't have that. I mean, with a full restraining order in process.
Y'all were having
Absolutely.
sex.
Yes, sir.
Interesting.
But I still didn't want the relationship. You see?
Yeah.
There's a lot of psychology that goes into this. And there was a part of me that wanted to still hold on, but there was that one part that stayed founded in, I'm not going back to the relationship.
So do you think that may have been part of the reason, because of this vulnerability after the relationship was over? Because, I mean, with any breakup, as I mentioned before, it's raw once it's over.
Yeah.
So do you think that's why you kind of slipped into this other relationship that you said lasted for about 6 months? Because he, in turn, moved in for a short period of time.
Not really. It was just in an interim until we found another place.
Anything that you'd like to say to someone who may be listening who's in this predicament, or someone who's perhaps the friend of someone who's in this kind of a situation? How should that person handle it?
To the person that's in the predicament, you got to find your way out. It's not your job to help. It's not your job to provide resources. You can get lists of counselors. Listen, it is not your job to even go to counseling together because we did that.
Okay.
Yeah. It is your job to
heal yourself.
Right. Heal yourself, to do your work. And it is not going to be comfortable or easy. It becomes harder when the two people live together. But it is possible. And I can guarantee you that change will not happen in the relationship until change happens in you.
And to add to that, I think that...
Oh, wait.
Go ahead.
You have to be willing to talk about it. You have to be willing to talk about it. And I'm not talking about to a friend because your friends already know. But I'm talking about to a professional. You need to see a counselor, a therapist, psychologist, whoever is a professional, because they have an unbiased opinion, professional opinion that will help you. And, therapists are trained to get you to digging into those deep places. Your friend is the person who will either tell it like it is, or they're just going to be there to comfort you.
And I think that it's important to really get an understanding of how you ended up in this place, because every lesson repeats itself until you learn it. And so you may come out of this situation, but a year from now, 3 years from now, you could find yourself in that same predicament if you don't get to the root cause of how you got there in the first place.
One thing about my therapist that I liked is that I went in there thinking that we were just going to talk about him the whole time. And baby, she
Yeah,
made
because it's about you.
No, she made me talk about myself.
Right. It's about
And
you.
we don't normally talk about ourselves.
Right.
To us.
Right. Because the beauty of counseling, it really is set up or designed so that you can hear yourself and hear your truth and kind of talk yourself.
And when you get to child, when you get with your friends, you talk about the other person.
Right. And for those that may be listening that are in this situation, trust and believe. When people love you and care about you, even the things that you don't talk about, the things that you don't discuss, they're very obvious to them. They're already obvious to them. These are the things that people already know because they pay attention to your life. When people pay attention to your life, they already know what's going on with you. So.
And they're there because they're in their minds. They're thinking like, I hope they just don't kill each other. That's what happens. Right. But in closing, to that person, to somebody who is a friend, be supportive, encourage them to get the help that they need, encourage them to that they're not going to be alone, and encourage them that they can do it, and be honest with them about being hard. Don't be all, oh child, you got to know. Be a real support, even in the toughest times, and be brutally honest with them as well. Don't leave them. I have people who abandoned me, but there are some people that stuck with me through every single bit of it.
If you find yourself in this situation, contact the domestic violence hotline. That number is 800-799-7233. Again, I am Craig the Writer Stewart, and this is So Much to Say. Follow us on Instagram at So Much to Say Podcast, and my personal Instagram is Craig the Writer Stewart. Visit the website as well if you're interested in purchasing the books. It's www.craigthewriterstewart.com. This podcast was brought to you by Green to Clean Professional Carpet Cleaning Services. Visit them at g2clean.com.